Every time he saw the small death lurking behind the shoulders of a man, he would sprinkle a drop towards him, and the first would flee, cursing and spitting. Hello everybody, I'm TheRubber. Today we bring you SCP Foundation Keter Class Object SCP-1440. SCP-1440, also known as the Old Man from Nowhere, is a man of unknown ethnicity and age. Though the subject's appearance is that of an octogenarian, it has not shown any signs of aging in the 50 years when its existence first came to the attention of the Foundation. SCP-1440's anomalous nature becomes apparent once it comes into contact with a human civilization, dwelling, or man-made object and settles there for a period of a few days. Prolonged exposure of any man-made object or person will cause increasingly destructive events to occur in 1440's vicinity until the destruction or death of the human stimuli. The only exceptions to the destruction are 1440 itself and his belongings, clothes, a sack made of unidentified material, a pack of worn playing cards, and a small glass cup. 1440 is very much aware of his destructive property and has thus vowed to avoid human populations as much as possible to prevent the spread of unintentional doom. Besides, 1440 is not actively hostile and will not resist attempts to be contained, though all such attempts have failed. Additionally, such attempts have led to a considerable loss of personnel and resources due to the aforementioned anomalous properties. During the fourth attempt to contain 1440 in Area 142, personnel began complaining about severe headaches and nausea. Over the next 2 days, 3 of the 4 on-site water purification filters broke down. Area 142's hangar collapsed, which caused the deaths of multiple airmen, and a doctor suffered a complete collapse of both kidneys and both lungs simultaneously. Over the containment's door, 1440 said, "It would be best if you let me go, for your own good. The first brother is already here. The 3 brothers are all cruel, all vengeful, all capable of holding a grudge for a long time. They are the cause of my misfortune, and therefore the cause of yours. And now, the second brother joins the first. Time is running short. Release me, or I cannot vouch for your safety. It might already be too late. The third is crueler than both his brothers, for he knows his appearance is the only thing that will set me free. But he never appears. I have spent time untold searching for him, trying to return his prize and those I won from his brothers, but to no avail. It is too late now. Doom is never far behind the second. Before you perish, allow me to give you a word of advice. Should you choose to challenge death to a game of cards for your life, there is one thing you must never do: win." At that moment, the on-site nuclear device stored in Area 142 detonated. Area 142 was destroyed, and all on-site personnel were killed, but 1440 suffered no apparent harm. The old man woke, and his failures flooded his mind once more. The destruction of the Foundation base was just another drop in an ocean of guilt. The desert he found himself in was a lonely, empty place, and for that he was glad. Out here, he could do little harm. As the soft desert sand crunched beneath his feet, he remembered that thrice-accursed game of cards that led to all of this, to the 3 follies that sealed his fate. First came the game, a game he should have never challenged them. But he was young and full of pride and had much to lose. He was a man in his prime when he lost his life in a meaningless war and found himself in the brothers' dark halls. Around him, his fellow soldiers walked silently towards the distant light, not even glancing at the 3 gaunt figures that showed them the way. But not him. He thought the others were fools. They were weaklings to accept their demise. Thus, in his vanity, he challenged his guides and refused to go forward until he was given the chance to fight. He got his chance, and he won. He won too much. Second came his greed. He took every hand, broke every gambit, and stole life from death's grasp with guile and skill. The brothers were displeased, but they accepted their defeat and showed him the door back to the world of the living. As he stood at the exit, he suddenly thought to himself, why stop now? Why settle for life when he could have glory, power, immortality? He turned and sat back at the table, and he won again, and again, and again. 3 prizes he won from them: the cup, the cards, and the sack. They were the brothers' prized possessions, and they offered him much if he would only return them: wealth and luck and health and glory. But he wanted to humiliate them, to make death grovel before him. So he took the prizes and left the brothers seething in rage. Third came the waste. The prizes were items of immense power, for they could keep the brothers at bay. The first cup held the elixir of life, and a drop of it would banish him, saving even the sickest of men from his grasp. Every time he saw the small death lurking behind the shoulders of a man, he would sprinkle a drop towards him, and the first would flee, cursing and spitting. A drop seemed like such a small thing, and the cup held so much water, so he used it carelessly. He banished the first from those too old or frail to keep on living, and from those the first rightfully owned. Eventually, the cup ran dry. When his wife began wasting away from the consuming illness, he had no water left for her. The first sneered as he took her away. The second prize was the cards. With the cards, he holds the power of the great death at bay. When war was brewing, when man turned against his brother, he was there to challenge the second and turn the tides of fire and steel. But like the waters of life, the cards of fate were wasted. They became more worn with every passing use. Eventually, the second refused to heed their call. He watched the world plummet into wars greater than he could ever imagine, watched millions die for nothing in the mud. The second laughed when he took them away. The prize of the third was the greatest. The sack of the all-death could hold anything within it. It could contain even the greatest catastrophes. It could stop even the direst forces from ever releasing their fury upon the earth. With the sack, he curbed the fury of storms, drowned fires that threatened to consume entire cities, and held creatures so unnatural and fell it was clear that their origin was not of this world. However, he used the sack as foolishly as he used the other items. The sack still held one last use, could hold one last being. In this search for the third, he saw the forces of darkness grow even stronger. He saw brave men and women like those of the Foundation risk their lives in order to contain them. Yet he would not spare the last use of his sack. It was all he had left, his final hope. He knew the only way he could force the third to release him from his endless torment was to capture him in the sack, and thus force him and his brothers to let him die. The All-Death never appeared though, not even to mock him. When the forces of the unknown claimed a victim, only silence greeted them. Once the prizes ran out, the true horror of his fate became apparent. The brothers feared him no longer and did not forgive his vanity, his wastefulness, or his lording over death. They wanted him to suffer, and death was far too good for him. Instead, he brought death upon everyone else. He was forced to seek the third forever and to watch humanity crumble in his wake. His curse, like his follies, was triple: never to die, always to seek, always to destroy. She didn't hear it. Not at first. At this time of night, the labs were deserted. The whole of Site-120 was practically empty. Corridors dim and silent, offices shut, experimental apparatus crouched in shadowy chambers. There were no anomalies contained on site, so the only people left in the compound were a couple of security staff. Researcher Jenner had always been wrapped up in her work. There was no one to go home to. She had been with the Foundation for many years. Many late nights like this, engrossed in the calculations and correlations spread in front of her. And so she didn't hear the noise, not when it started. It wasn't until she breathed in the smell, faint but thick with rot, that she started to get up from her work and noticed the noise. A soft, crackling hiss from the far corner of the lab, a sound like wet leaves in a fire, like whispers from a dried-up throat just at the edge of hearing. Absently, Jenna rubbed her eyes, pushed her glasses back up, and peered across the darkened room. The noise was still there. She had taken 4 steps across the lab when the lamp behind her blinked out. Swallowed in darkness, she froze. The noise had gone. Her breathing had grown rapid and shallow, and she forced 2 deeper breaths before taking out her phone and switching on the torch. The noise started again. It was thicker somehow, moist. She looked over her shoulder, indecisive. Should I stay or should I go? Almost before she realized, she was walking cautiously across the shadowed room towards the source of the sound. Her torch lit up the back wall of the lab. A black smear had spread across it, the paint and plaster bubbling and flaking slowly. The sizzle was louder, and the air was heavy with an oily stink of decay. She could see the surface of the wall had softened, sagging in wet bulges. A hand shot out of the wall without warning. Its fingers were broad and gray, sticky with black mucus, grabbing her forearm. Instantly, her lab coat started to melt, and as she yanked her arm away, the sleeve tore off, disintegrating. The fingers snatched at her again, and she dropped her phone. As she stumbled backwards, the torch shone up from the floor, lighting the figure that pushed its way through the mottled, fleshy wall. It looked like an old man, decrepit and rotten. It was naked, its skin slick and shiny as pitch. Its flesh was withered and decomposing, with missing toes and misshapen feet. A distended gut protruded obscenely from beneath a narrow chest, arms spread wide in a mockery of greeting. Above a ruined throat, she saw a too-wide mouth locked in a rictus grin. And, oh God, those eyes. The thing emerging from the wall before her looked like a man, but its eyes were gray and flat as a shark's. The researcher took another 2 steps back, reaching behind her for something, anything solid to hold. Her breath caught in her throat. The old man stood still, dripping black foulness onto the floor as the tiles began liquefying beneath him. Her phone sank beneath the surface. The torch flickered out. In darkness, she ran. As she turned to close the doors behind her, she could see that hideous figure pacing deliberately across the room. Something about its lack of hurry unnerved her deeply. She forced herself to keep running down the corridor, hoping the night guard was close. Hello everybody, I'm TheRubber. Today, we bring you a tale from the SCP Foundation. Frank! Frank! After the second turn, she saw him, halfway from the guard station. What's wrong? You look pale. Frank, oh thank God, it's... Her chest was heaving and she could hardly speak. Slow down. Take a second to... Frank's voice tailed off, and she looked up to see his gaze fixed on the end of the dim corridor. The old man was walking towards them, trailing a viscid ooze. Frank trained the torch on him and his other arm on his holster. The old man's eyes shone avid and empty. Hey, stop now. I'll shoot you. The old man ignored his warning. Frank fired 3 shots. 2 hits to the chest. The old man stopped, gradually crumpling forward. The researcher let out a breath. The glistening corpse sank into the floor, swallowed by the slime it had generated. What the hell? Frank started towards the blackened floor, but she held his sleeve. Wait, I think it's some kind of acid. We need to call someone. Frank pulled out his radio, but before he could push the button, a glob of black mucus landed on his radio, setting it fizzing. Frank dropped it like he had been stung and glanced upwards. The next drop landed in his right eye. Jenner stumbled backwards as Frank screamed and clutched his face. She could hear the hiss as the corrosion ate at his eye socket from the inside. Then she saw that grinning face emerge from the dark patch on the ceiling, and the old man dropped onto Frank's back. One hand slid into the muscles of his shoulder like it was dough, and Frank's scream became louder. As he crashed into the wall of the corridor, she saw the other hand sink into Frank's throat and tear, and the scream was abruptly cut off. Frank started to collapse into the wall as it darkened around him. The last thing she saw was those eyes, locked on hers as they sank back into the blackness. Her heart pounded. She tried to stand, but she was lightheaded, and her ankle was throbbing. She had to run. Every second not running was death. Dragging herself up on a cabinet, she tried to think, eyes flicking between the ruined radio and the puckered bruises on the wall and floor. Run? But where? The guard's office was her best bet. From there, she could use the alarm to call for additional Foundation support. Don't look behind, she told herself. Each step was a battle, trying to move faster to stop her leg from buckling. Every shadow in the half-lit hallway loomed like a threat. Forward momentum was the only thing keeping her upright. She rounded the last corner and finally saw the room at the end of the hall. With a grunt of effort, she pushed herself to a final run, closing the final yards and crashing through the door. Her first step inside sank shin deep into the frothing muck that used to be the floor. She fell and her hands were caught too, skin burning as they were sucked deeper into the ground. Looking up, she could see the console with the alarm button just out of reach, and she wailed in sick despair. It was the last sound she made before the world was consumed by night. Death did not come. She was submerged in a lake, but somehow the researcher could still breathe. Was she still falling? She couldn't tell. All feeling had vanished, her skin no longer stinging, although the blood still pounded in her ankle. She stayed there suspended for minutes, unsure of the passing of time, of what this meant. Then the gloom lightened, blurred, and resolved into a tiled floor. The gray light showed her a room she didn't recognize, but which was somehow familiar. Dust, dead leaves, and scraps of metal were strewn across the floor, and one of the walls had buckled in on itself. She pulled herself over to the door and looked out into a dilapidated hallway, mold and rust covering the ceiling, and the floor contorted like a writhing snake. There were no lights, but the hall was lit by a gray-green glow, a sickly aurora undulating sluggishly across every surface. She was right. It was a dimensional anomaly, probably controlled by that thing. The researcher felt desperate. She's in its territory now. Probably it had made this place or had lived here for years, so it would know every inch. But if she had fallen into it, that meant there was a way out. She just had to keep moving, and she would find it. She limped into the corridor, clambering over collapsed furniture and wiping plaster dust from her hands. Keep going forward. Look for an exit. Don't think about what might be behind you. Don't think about Frank. Don't think about that grin and those eyes. A metallic buzzing grew louder, and she realized that it had been there since she arrived in this place. She tried to move faster. She needed to stop, just for a moment. She grabbed at a door handle. Relief flooded her when it opened. She pushed past the door and walked into another hallway. However, the disarray of the halls was gone. Everything here was in its proper place. Tidy, like a hospital or classroom. A closet stood against the wall at the back of the room. Jenner opened the closet, and the corpses fell out onto her. It was a mountain of decomposing limbs and organs, all limp and slick. They slithered down at her under the weight of the pile, trailing gore. She retched at the deep, foul smell of putrescence, flailing wildly to pull herself free. A bloated hand pawed at her leg as it fell, and she felt something slippery and soft under her feet as she stood. This assemblage would have taken dozens of bodies, she thought, still gagging. As it slumped further, it exposed a face she recognized. Frank. A deep hole where his eye had been, and his neck was torn open, black jelly dripping from the flesh. Her eyes scanned the line of his body and saw his leg twisted viciously upwards, exposed bone protruding where the foot had been ripped off. She was trying to hold in a scream when she heard movement from the back of the closet. Without thinking, she bolted for the door. Behind her, the sounds of sinewy limbs pulling themselves clear of the corroded wall. She could feel the old man had entered the room, only a few steps back. She pushed open the door and took a left turn, with the hope that it would lead her to an exit. The footsteps behind her were getting louder, closer. Suddenly, a hand clutched at her back, her lab coat melting to tatters. The floor beneath her started to bubble. With a yell, she leaped forward but couldn't get far. A pathetic effort, she thought. The ghoul was still behind her. She heard a new noise, like a deep growl. Suddenly, she realized that the corpse before her had a lump of new flesh in its throat, bloody and ragged. Frank's throat, she realized, and her stomach dropped. She looked again at the old man, seeing its misshapen carcass, patched and scarred. It looked at her with its dead eyes. She made no sound. The old man took a step towards her. It held up its left hand. She could see the mark where the ring had been. She couldn't think, couldn't breathe, couldn't move. The old man reached towards her, tenderly holding her cheek. Her skin puckered and liquefied, flesh dripping from her face. She screamed then. The last thing she felt was the weight of the two of them sinking into the floor, locked in a final, burning embrace. The next morning, Jenner was found dead in the facility. Her skin was dry and cracked. Her eyes appeared to have been clawed out, leaving only 2 hollow sockets. Mouth wide open, lower jaw dislocated. Her expression transfixed in an internal agony. Viewer discretion is advised. The mist of the chilly night engulfed the nursery grounds. It was dark, but the illumination at the nursery kept Emily going. She had to complete her task flawlessly this time, or else she would lose her job. As Emily carried the freshly repotted plants from one table to another, a loud bang shocked her since she was all alone. It's probably a squirrel again, she comforted herself. Emily slowly settled the pots on the table. Suddenly, she felt the presence of someone behind her, and a strong scent of flowers beset her. She tried to move, but her movement was hindered, and she felt something lingering around her boots. It was a rope of vines, slowly moving and wrapping loops around her body, imbibing her with all its might. She started screaming, but with each scream, the vines squeezed her tighter and tighter, to the point of asphyxiation. The nursery was shaken up by the piercing screams of Emily Taylor, and this would be the last of what will ever be heard of her. Hello everybody, I'm TheRubber. Today we bring you a SCP Foundation Euclid Class Object, SCP-3019. SCP-3019, also known as the Soylent Nursery, is a property owned by a nursery located in the outskirts of an undisclosed location in Australia. It primarily composed of the following areas: production areas for the propagation of plants, warehouse housing industrial potting machinery, a loading area, a green waste disposal area, chemical engineering building, and an office building. After the mysterious disappearance of 84 employees, which footage showed them being dragged away by the anomalous vines and never to be seen again, the nursery caught the attention of the Foundation. The area was immediately acquired, and Site-919 was promptly established in close proximity to oversee the nursery for any possible anomalies. No abnormality within the site was found throughout the day. However, shortly after sunset, the team observed the appearance of a humanoid entity, henceforth designated as SCP-3019-A. Its forearms appeared to be extended via wooden growths. Its severely scarred face is capable of peeling back into 6 petal-shaped flaps via embedded vines emerging from the eye sockets, nasal passages, and mouth of the skull. With its outlook hideously covered in green tailing plants, it displayed extensive knowledge of horticulture. It had also proven capable of lifting weights in excess of 600 kilograms through the use of muscles reinforced with plant cells. After observing the entity, the team sent a D-Class personnel to find out how 3019-A would respond to intruders. Even though he was careful and slow with his movement, as soon as he stepped on the threshold of the site, 3019-A became alarmed and hostile. It then moved towards him by the most direct path possible without disturbing the plants, and bludgeoned him to death with agricultural tools. It then relocated the body to the potting area of the nursery, where the D-Class was constricted and eventually crushed by vine-like growths before feeding them into mulching units. The remains were converted into blood and bone fertilizer to be applied to the plants. No other anomalies were detected until an ill-fated evening, when the sunset brought the unfortunate horrors into the light. With 3 months of no workers working to take care of the plants, the nursery's outlook was tarnished. The plants were withered and ruined, which angered and distressed 3019-A, resulting in a horrifying array of events. On the 9th of January, at around 9 p.m., 3019-A appeared distressed. It breached the perimeter of Site-919. 8 Foundation agents retreated into the nearby woods after trying to neutralize 3019-A, which resulted in distressing it even more. to the point that it attempted to incapacitate the agents. In doing so, contact between the agents and Foundation was broken, and thus 3019-A's location was lost for 43 minutes. After receiving reports of possible sightings of 3019-A in a nearby town, MTF Theta-4 was dispatched to intercept it. Later, 3019-A was cited to have re-entered the nursery, but it was not alone. It was dragging 19 civilians and Foundation personnel restrained in a mass of vines. Okay, get ready to take the shot. Wait, hold your fire. Some of the victims broke free, but were stabbed in their bodies by 3019-A's growths and injected with an unknown substance. The same vines that were restraining the captives started to grow rapidly from their wounds and orifices. It then transported 6 of the captives alive into 3019's office facility. Damn it! Alright, we gotta get in there. Move in! They gained access to the nursery by removing a section of the wall, since the doors and windows could not be opened. To their surprise, the building seemed to be warping its angles like a series of illusions. Every time they tried to follow the stairs trying to reach the office, they would end up with the same wall standing right in front of them. When the illusion began to get worse, the team retreated. The night passed. When the task force was finally able to access the office building basement the next day, no trail or evidence of any victim was found. The fact that 84 people vanished into thin air as if never existed was disconcerting for the Foundation. At 9 p.m. the same day, 6 humanoid entities emerged from the building and began caring for the plants in the same manner as 3019-A. These entities resembled human beings with their skin replaced by flowering plants and soil. The roots were structured and integrated into the bodies, similar to that of veins, resulting in apparent brain death. MTF Theta-4 then successfully captured the specimens. However, upon removal from the nursery grounds, they began to deteriorate rapidly. Fortunately, researchers have managed to extract their DNA and had confirmed that they were composed of the victims of 3019-A. 5 days passed, and the Foundation discovered a horrifying truth. The sources of the unknown flowering plants growing within 3019, which displayed human traits including skin, rudimentary nervous systems, and eyes, were actually from the missing employees. A year later, a drone sent to film the nursery after sunset revealed something sinister about the identity of 3019-A. The feed showed a tattoo of an oak tree with elaborate roots turning the flowers on 3019-A's left bicep. This closely matched the tattoo on the left bicep of Emily Taylor. Another raid on the nursery grounds was conducted, and Emily's possessions were then investigated. A letter was found. It read, "Miss Taylor, over the past 30 years, I have striven to make this into the most successful business possible. We are a hardworking team here, and with that hard work comes the benefits of profit and promotion through our ranks. And as such, we very much value hard workers. You are not a hard worker. Every time I visit the dispatch area, I see you working slowly, sloppily, and spending most of your time socializing with your coworkers. Despite multiple warnings, you remain a problem for me and the team at the nursery, and we are sick of it. You have had your second, third, and final warnings, and now it is time to suffer the consequences. Enclosed in this envelope is a little something I made to improve your work performance. Perhaps this experience will finally teach you the meaning of hard work and respect for your employers. We look forward to working with you for many, many years to come. Sincerely yours, Eric." The content of the letter sent chills down his spine. My God. Jackson, take this letter to the boys in the bureau. They need to see this. We need to find this Eric guy. Just then, he noticed something inside the envelope. Wait, don't touch it. I'll take this. Subsequent investigations showed trace elements of soil and unknown spores in the letter. Despite ongoing search efforts, the current whereabouts of Mr. Eric remained unknown to this date.